Hey, I'm Bailey,
I'm Michael.
And I'm David.
and welcome to our next to last episode of this podcast. Today, we are doing the fabled, the legend Q&A that we have discussed and mentioned and harassed people about for a long time. For months now, we have said we're going to do a Q&A. Send in your questions. And send in your questions, you did. So, as I mentioned in the last episode, if you guys didn't hear, I actually reached out to some of all of the pastors that we interviewed and asked them, hey, we gave you questions. Why don't you give us questions? Because we're going to do a Q&A. And I'll go ahead and admit this on the outset that a lot of them were super busy and just didn't have time to get back to us. But we do have a couple questions from some of the pastors. So we'll be answering those. But before we get into those questions, I think it's more appropriate to start out with this question that we got a long time ago. I don't remember when it was. I think it was when we had just wrapped up our church tour thing series. It was sometime last year. It was a while back. But this is from Evelyn Grace, who is, as you'll recall, Pastor Kendall's wife. And so this is from her comment on our one of our episodes that we just never got to answering. So I wanted to get this one answered on the outset. And so she says, quote, I would love an answer from each of you. Michael and David, aside from your beliefs, have or do you pray to God? I know Michael believes in a higher power and that I will label God. To show you his glory in Jesus Christ, to reveal the truth to you personally. I know it's hard to pray for something you may not believe in. I know you are a believer, Bailey, and David is an atheist. But I also know that you are on a journey. So I asked in the spirit of this discussion on your journey. Just curious, as there is no judgment here, just a curiosity. I've seen amazing things happen when people ask God specific questions and expect an answer. Love listening. Guys, keep it up. The journey is real.
Okay. Well, I'll start us off.
End quote, since I've for some reason decided to ask the quotes. I'm not going to add the quotes for the rest of them. Just assume you can figure it out. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll start us off here. And I do what I consider prayer, which is conversing and asking whatever higher power it is out there. Because I do believe in a monotheistic higher power. I'm not one of those, there's so many gods. No, I believe in a higher power, a singular.
Mm-hmm.
And it's those conversations and the questions asked that help guide me through this journey. And because I do want to find a spiritual home, I do want to find the truth. And I do want to believe whatever that may be in my heart. So I do ask. But I don't ask for peace from empty acceptance. Because that in and of itself would be me lying to myself and creating something that isn't there. And it's through this journey that I have to remember to stay humble, diligent, and stay open-minded and keep that communication and build myself both as a man on this earth and spiritually, so I can find that comfort and I can find the truth, whatever that may be. And so yeah, I do ask for guidance in this journey, because you can't go about it alone, at least in my viewpoint of theism. Because I used to be a deist. I used to believe we were just put here.
That was actually going to be one of my questions to you is like, because I know in the past you've mentioned like you're flirting with deism or theism and you don't really know which one. Well, I guess technically deism is a type of theism, but what I mean is you don't know if you're a deist or not. So has that changed?
I still have questions about it, but for the most part, I've leaned more to the standard theistic worldview, not the deist worldview that was popular during the journey to America and the founding of America, which
Right.
a lot of our founding fathers were deist. They just
Right.
said they're a Freemason for an easier conversion. But I do believe that, unlike the deist worldview, which is very God is hands off, very letting people do what people do, and also in a sort of way predeterminist, that I don't believe in a God that just doesn't interact with the world in any way, doesn't communicate, doesn't sometimes move things even wane about. That has changed. Hasn't always been where I've been at. But so yeah, I do have those conversations and do ask, and I think a large part of that change has came from personal experience throughout life and this podcast, my viewpoints on the supernatural, and creating that bridge in my brain, that spider web that connects the supernatural is there. And in essence, a higher power or a God is a supernatural thing because it's something outside of this realm that we can't even begin to quantify in our world because it's outside of it, outside of time and space and numbers and all that. But yeah, and I do think that's a very great question to ask, and I'm so sorry it took us so long to get to you.
Yeah.
And I'll be honest, I wrote a bunch of stuff on this question. But I kind of put it back just to the heart of it because that's where I'm at in my life.
Okay. I want to ask one follow-up. We probably don't need to spend this long on every question because we have a lot of questions. But you mentioned that you pray for guidance kind of in your search. Would you be able to give like kind of specifics on like what you pray for? How do you pray? Like, how do you direct that? And if that's too personal of a question, you don't have to answer it, but I was just curious.
Well, one thing is due to my cultural background, which is the rural South in the Bible Belt, I do use the term God. I don't just go, hey, whatever's up there, man. And it's usually in moments of meditation or contemplation, where I'm just sitting there alone with my thoughts, and either I don't know how to process something, I don't know if I'm doing necessarily the right thing, or I'm looking for a change. And it may be just a feedback loop. Maybe I just need to say it to myself, but say it to someone else, and I'll find my answer. Or maybe something happens from the moment I ask to the decision that helps guide me into the way. Like, I didn't know if moving was the right thing to do and when to do it, how to do it. But I still believe everything happens for a reason. And during the transition to where I live now, a lot of things changed. Personally, to extended family members, to the town I lived in previously, to just the neighborhood and the dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of things changed that made me go, this isn't where I need to be in my life. This isn't going to lead me to being a better person, to growing as a whole unit.
Yeah.
And so it is what it is. And I can't sit there and tell you if it's strictly spiritual or strictly, just chance, but I do believe everything happens for a reason. And chance isn't what we make of it.
Gotcha. Well, that's awesome. Thank you for your answer. What about you, David?
Well, say when I was younger, I don't exactly remember the exact age, but probably some teen years, something like that. Up until, I did, but a lot of that was kind of just where we came from. Like, you pray before you go to bed and stuff like that. And I don't necessarily pray nowadays, but kind of like in some ways what Michael says, kind of just getting your thoughts out of you in some ways and kind of contemplating and thinking about, say, what do you need to do to move on? Stuff like that in some sort of sense, kind of a meditative state. I could compare that to.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and I will say the one thing culturally in America that we don't appreciate is the act of meditating, separating yourself from the world, because I think prayer is a very meditative thing. It's something where you should kind of separate yourself from the outside world around you and then have that conversation, have that dialogue. Whereas in America, it's very, we want to build rituals around it. And like, oh yeah, I need to get on my knees before I go to bed. I need to do it before I eat. We just think about when we should do it. Not, hey, some things just aren't going right. Maybe I need to, ask for some guidance on it. Or, hey, things are going great. Maybe I should talk about it. We just do it out of habit instead of doing it out of, what's the word I'm looking for here?
Instead of like faith, maybe, or like an inclination towards God.
Yeah, out of faith or out of longing for knowledge and guidance. We just do it out of habit.
All right. Well, thank you, Evelyn, for that question. I think we're going to go ahead and move on to Pastor John. For those who don't remember, this is the pastor of Bethlehem Lutheran. He asks us a couple questions here. The first one is, how has interviewing clergy from several different Christian traditions affected your perspective of Christianity? So I'll let you guys answer that one first, actually.
I guess for, say, B, because as we kind of stated at the beginning, we grew up around more so, even our area, more like classic Southern Baptist ideals.
Like Baptist, Methodist, Southern evangelical Christianity.
Yeah, I mean, Methodist is a little bit different in some aspects. It's kind of what you would view kind of average Christianity, I guess you could say, in a lot of people's eyes.
But that's what you were familiar with because you grew up in a Methodist church.
Yeah, Methodist, but we also attended
Baptist church, yeah.
Yeah, and then I forget what one of our relatives went to, but it was more kind of evangelical.
Right.
But it's kind of, as we know, Christianity was a lot more kind of diverse and sometimes divisive, but it's kind of let us appreciate those kind of differences and see, like, for myself, hypothetically, where would I stand?
Right.
And what do I appreciate? And kind of what does everybody believe in? Because we kind of grew up like, oh, Catholic.
Yeah, because I'm sure you didn't really have much of a context of what the different Christian sects believe before.
Yeah.
And now, doing that series kind of helped flesh that out a little bit.
Maybe. I knew some fundamentals because history,
right.
I know about, about Russian Orthodox than what we would know about Catholic, but I fascinated with, the Cold War and stuff.
Right, yeah. All right, what about you, Michael?
I would say, since I do have such a basis in history, interviewing all the different clergy helped bring out the knowledge that I already knew, but bring it out in person and make me be able to appreciate it and look at it. And granted, yes, I did
maybe make it less abstract.
Yeah, I did learn a lot about the different schools of thoughts within Christianity, different philosophies, all of that. And it really gave me an appreciation for both the history from where they came, the people practicing, and it showed me a lot of the love, care, and humility that all of these people were showing us, bringing us into their place of worship, having this dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
And it helped me look outside my normal schools of thoughts of what modernity has created in Christianity and the stereotypical fly-by-night Christian that we are so accustomed to seeing in our area.
Right.
And that has helped me progress in my own spiritual journey. And so for that, I got to thank all of the wonderful people we've met and discussed throughout this whole thing.
Yeah.
Because it
definitely
really took us out of the cookie cutter box of what people see as Christianity in America.
I would say for me, it has given me definitely a broader historical context and understanding of the phronema of the various Christian expressions. And what I mean by that is the phronema is a Greek word. It essentially means mindset or worldview. And there is a distinct way of doing theology and thinking about theological topics in an Orthodox perspective versus a Catholic perspective versus a Protestant perspective. And even within Protestantism, Lutherans are going to think things about things a lot differently than Calvinists, So, I mean, experiencing these things and having spoken with their pastors, it has really helped me to kind of see the natural outworking of their theology and the terminology that they use and the way that they answered questions. The way that they conducted themselves in the interview kind of reflected the phronema of each of those Christian traditions. And, I knew some basic understandings of each of these groups. That's kind of how I was able to craft the questions to begin with. But again, it kind of made all of that more concrete when we actually did the interviews.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think it also made us all more willing and wanting, because I know you've done a ton of research for this whole podcasted series. And I think we all have learned so much, and whether that's through personal study, through conversations with each other, or through these experiences. And it's brought up a lot of questions and given us a lot of answers. And it's planted that seed for us to do more research and find out more in the future. And I think in its own different way for each of us, it's kind of helped progress us through this chapter of our life in its own special way.
Definitely. So another question he asked is, has this experience challenged your perspectives and or beliefs?
I wouldn't say change the core of my beliefs, but it kind of helped me bring them forward and allow them to flow and take things into perspective more and just appreciate life and all the flaws and beauty and all. And once again, a lot of that comes from just the way we were treated from these interviews. And even if we may disagree, there was still that common ground of love and grace and appreciation for what we were doing, the discussions we were having, and us wanting that dialogue.
Yeah.
And in some points, it has helped me contemplate more and try to find my way where I fit in.
It kind of gives you like a little bit of a roadmap as to what exists in Christian thought.
Yeah.
I'm sure.
And granted, I still have great existential anxiety over, what happens if I croak tomorrow. But it's also allowed me not to just focus on that and to kind of take it step by step, take it day by day, learn more, want to learn more, and not just lock myself into agnostic theism throughout, because the end goal isn't to stay the same. It's to grow and progress as a person. May I not find the truth before I die? That's a possibility. But this journey especially has helped me keep to my core beliefs of staying honest and humble with myself and being willing to listen to people and to whatever may come my way.
All right. What about you, David?
Yeah. Kind of similar, Phil, with Michael. It hasn't necessarily challenged, but just like with him, it's made me kind of appreciate even like kind of fundamentals, kind of humility, grace, stuff like that. it's given me a different perspective in which to kind of reflect upon that. But yeah, still an atheist. Everyone's rooting for me to change.
Yeah, I know.
But you're not one of them atheists that people were worried about you being when we started this.
Yeah. Okay, so for me, I would say that, and this is somewhat tangentially related, but one question I've had as a result of doing that series is, how has Satan managed to divide us this much? He obviously uses and manipulates our sinful inclinations to his benefit. Now, the experience of visiting these churches and speaking with their pastors has caused me to also sort of simplify narratives about church history, because it does get very, very complicated. So one that I kind of defer to, obviously I'm becoming Orthodox. So for example, I would say that Catholics have added to the faith, Protestants took things away, and the Orthodox have preserved the faith. And also kind of what I mentioned with the last question is the phronema and the founding principles of these churches take them in distinct directions theologically. But if I'm honest, the division really just saddens me, because this is not what Christ would have wanted. And especially the division between the Eastern Orthodox and the Roman Catholic churches. They seem to kind of need one another in order to maintain balance, but as it stands, a millennium of history and theological innovations separate us. So this is really made clear when I watch videos by people like Gospel Simplicity or 10-Minute Bible Hour. When both of these individuals, the hosts of those channels, are Protestant, but they frequently tour and interview Catholic churches, Orthodox churches, and the various expressions of those faiths, because there's not just, it's not just Catholic and just Orthodox. Like there's different rites within those traditions, and that's actually something I didn't know about and would have loved to have known about before we did that series, but water under the bridge. But they talk with these people, and there really seems to be a lot, and there is a lot of common ground. There are just a few distinct things that really separate us. So I think there's a lot more in common with Orthodox and Catholics than there are with Catholics and Protestants, for example. I think the further you go along in history, the more division happens, and the further people kind of get from what Christianity was originally. And really, it's just kind of sad. I don't know if that's necessarily challenged my perspective or belief in that sense, but it's really made me think about how things have played out, I guess. So he asked one other question, actually two other questions technically. He says, how has this experience affected your own core beliefs and spirituality? I'll let you guys go ahead.
I don't say that it necessarily changed my core beliefs, because I still stand belief-wise for certain things, and those things I hold true.
Yeah.
But it has helped progress me spiritually, because it's given me new schools of thoughts and avenues to follow through into research and kind of think about.
Mm-hmm.
Because after the interviews, I would go home and just kind of recap in my head everything that was asked, the questions put forward, the questions we asked, and even the interpersonal dialogue we had either before or after the interview.
Just out of curiosity, have there been any episodes that you've gone back and listened to again since they've come out?
I have not had time, so no.
Oh, okay.
But
gotcha.
It's just something that, especially as we went on with the interview series, kind of brought me back to just kind of, again, meditatively think and ponder and ask these questions. And even if, say, I disagree with something, think about what common ground do we hold. So
Yeah.
I'd say it has progressed me spiritually, but it hasn't changed my core beliefs of what I believe in. But it has
Okay.
made me appreciate the differences in our beliefs.
What about you, David?
Yeah. I mean, quite similar to my answer to the previous question. It's made me kind of appreciate our perspectives are different, kind of similar beliefs and fundamental values we might share, but still an atheist.
I would say that in general, I'm probably far more open-minded about the validity of various liturgical expressions of Christianity. Obviously, I came to certain conclusions about certain places that I liked and other conclusions about places that I did like. And when I say like, I mean like not that like I personally appreciated them aesthetically. Like that plays into it for sure. But there's a correlation between what I find beautiful in a Sunday liturgy. I mean, even low church Protestants have liturgy. They just don't call it liturgy. It's just what the service is, basically. But, you know, from my perspective, what I like tends to align more with what has been the historical practice of Christianity. And I find much more genuine, I guess that's not a word, genuineness. I find it much more genuine and beautiful. And so that's why I've kind of gravitated towards that, because I feel like there's been so much that has been stripped away from that historic Christian tradition. And so that being said, like, obviously I have my biases. That's where I've landed theologically. I'm going to be chrismated in the Orthodox Church next month. So that's how it's affected my own core belief in spirituality. But at the same time, I try not to be, and maybe this doesn't always come across in these episodes, but I try not to be too overly polemical against people of different Christian backgrounds. I know I kind of lob things at Protestants a lot of times, but there's just a lot I object to in Protestantism. And there was a lot of assumptions that I didn't realize were there when I was a Protestant, and things that, like dogmas that you essentially have to believe, like sola fide and sola scriptura, that I just I never really believed in the first place. And, you know, for example, like I have a lot of respect for Catholics. Like I don't agree with them theologically on a lot of things. There's a reason I'm Orthodox and not Catholic at the end of the day, but I respect them a lot because their liturgical expressions generally are very beautiful. There is a long-standing history and tradition within the Catholic Church, and it has been there since the beginning. And there is a lot identifiable that early Christians would identify in the Catholic Church. And so I find that very beautiful. And I think there's a lot of straw mans that come out from, you know, maybe some low church Protestants that just are very Romophobic. And so they don't have anything good to say about Catholicism, but there's a lot of beauty there. And so I will play devil's advocate for a lot of Catholics, just because I think a lot of the flack that they get is sometimes undeserving. Now, granted, they do get a lot of flack for things that they do deserve. But anyway, that was kind of a long-winded answer. I'll shut up now.
Yeah, and just to kind of add, especially in the area that we are in, yeah, the Catholics do get a ton of undeserved flack.
Yeah.
But we are willing to give people flack when they deserve it, too.
Yeah.
And
sorry, go ahead.
It's kind of in some denominations, it's calling the kettle black. That makes sense.
Yes, because they don't understand that they come from the Catholic Church historically. Like that, some people that are like, oh, Catholics aren't even Christian. Like, you literally wouldn't have your faith if it weren't for the Catholic Church.
Yeah, and also
it's just
at the end of the day,
like, it frustrates me when people are historically ignorant.
At the end of the day, in my eyes, the biggest cores of what Christianity is should bring the brethren together and not separate them, because you
Yeah.
still believe in Jesus, you still believe in God. There's you believe there's more after this life,
Mm-hmm.
and that should give you more common ground to converse and stand on when all the bickering back and forth doesn't, to me, make too much sense. I do get the philosophical differences and the different schools of thoughts, but in media, I don't get why it's so different.
Mm-hmm.
And just the superiority complex that's there in some churches.
Yeah.
Not a big fan.
So his last question for us is when would you like to begin adult instruction at a Missouri Synod Lutheran church, perhaps Bethlehem, Aiken? Hey, you can't blame me for trying.
Well, as the viewers will know,
yeah, we don't.
Bethlehem Aiken's probably going to be out of the range for me.
Yeah.
And Bailey's getting crucimated. But hey,
Chris made it, not crucimated.
Yeah,
It's
I'm
okay.
sorry about that. I'm new to these words and this realm. But
yeah, so we don't live in Aiken anymore, except for David. So actually, when Pastor John emailed these questions to me, I did kind of give him an answer to this question already, but I was like, well, Michael's moved to Atlanta and I've moved to Nashville, so
and David's a filthy
probably won't
atheist.
be joining. Yeah, we probably won't be joining, the Aiken Lutheran Church, but Bethlehem Lutheran. But maybe David, maybe you can convince him one day, because he's still there. So maybe you can get him there one day. But I'd
much rather you guys get him than the crazy Jehovah's Witnesses that show up at the door.
I actually got mail from
you
them.
guys are
today.
a lot nicer.
Yeah,
I get mail from them often.
Yeah, but I appreciate the offer.
Oh yeah, I greatly appreciate the offer. I don't see myself becoming a Lutheran for theological reasons, but maybe one day I could come visit a service, because I do think y'all had a very nice service, very welcoming. Yeah. I greatly appreciate our interview with you and just the whole process. Yeah, and it's a very quaint, beautiful church. And again, I appreciate the questions and the hospitality you showed us when we came.
Yeah, so thank you, Pastor John, for your questions. Now we're going to move on to Pastor Trent, who was the pastor of, or technically still is, but, in our interview, he's the pastor of Grace Presbyterian. And he asks, why do the brothers think the best option forward for their lives is to reject Christianity? Is there something about the way Christianity is practiced that they would point to as a reason to continue their rejection? If there is something that they'd point to, and is there something that they would point to, and is that spread across each example of Christianity you interacted with in this journey? That's kind of a very pointed question, but
I'll start by answering the question backwards.
Okay.
The only things I would say about the practice of Christianity is more due to the imperfect nature of man and the infiltration of modernity of cultural or in-passing Christians. We have spoken on this many times, in especially our episode, Issues with Christianity.
Right.
The cultural or in-passing Christians who do not want or feel the need to grow spiritually and ask questions and think critically regarding their faith. And I know that is not a fault of the religion. That is a fault of man and the imperfect nature of us. And I'm still learning and getting my feet wet in religion after setting it aside throughout my teenage years and rejecting it. And only more recently, with a cleared head and open heart and a want for knowledge after years of neglect, am I able to do that. Mm-hmm. So I wouldn't say I'm currently rejecting Christianity, but as someone who believes in a higher power, I know that I can't lie to myself about what I believe in, and I damn sure can't lie to something outside of myself, greater than myself, because that would be seen right through, and I would be no better than the issue I have with the modernity in Christianity.
Yeah. So you're still discerning through the process, essentially.
Yeah, I'm not shying away from religion. It's more of I am finding what I believe in. Because if I don't believe in it, I'm just committing one of the greatest sins and lying about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel that's just fucking terrible.
Right. What about you,
and
David?
I don't want to lie to the people either about what I believe in, because I've always stood on humility and honesty. So yeah. But David, what about you? As Bailey said.
One good thing to bring up, I forget her name, but we actually talked about this after going to the Russian Orthodox Church and having...
Oh, my former professor?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because she kind of asked like how I viewed, say, kind of spiritual stuff. And as I told her, like kind of like a sixth sense, that kind of a mystical sense. So for me, it's not really the rejection of, say, just Christianity, but it is, in my viewpoint, the absence of that kind of spiritual, mystical existence, at least from how I perceive it.
Mm-hmm.
And
well,
as
go ahead.
And as I told her, like, and like, for example, if I experienced something, then that would lead me definitely out of being an atheist, at least in the Michael territory. But at least currently, I'm an atheist because of, say, the lack of kind of spiritual.
Yeah.
So you're a T-Mobile cell phone looking for service.
In some ways, I guess. Wow. I mean, I might not be actively looking for it, but if it or when it occurs, I'm open to being like, okay, I need to reevaluate everything here.
Yeah.
Maybe you should actively look for it.
So to play devil's advocate here, with Pastor Trent's question, you say you're not rejecting Christianity, but at the same time, you are an atheist, and that's not Christian. So, I mean, I think it's a little bit different for Michael. And I don't think this is special pleading, because he's agnostic. He's a theist. He's, obviously not settled in his ground and his beliefs. So it's different for him because he's not really in a final resting place, I guess, with what he believes. But you right now you hold a belief that is
the absence of belief.
Exactly. The belief that is basically defined by not being Christian or not religious in any sense. So in that sense, you kind of are rejecting Christianity.
Yeah, for kind of how I was viewpointing it, I'm just not picking Christianity out and saying no, but it's just that kind of barrier between any religious viewpoint in my eyes, from the kind of standard Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, to weird occult stuff that I think is hilarious to think about.
Yeah. And one other thing that you mentioned in your first response was that you don't really see a strong kind of spiritual emphasis in Christianity. Am I misquoting you on that? Or?
Yeah. Well, I didn't.
Mystical. That was the word that you used.
Yeah.
You said there's not really a strong mystical experience in Christianity, but I would disagree. I think there are some that are.
I didn't say anything about the mysticism in Christianity, but you did bring up a good point, which was part of what we were talking about during that discussion, is like a lot of, say, more modern Christianity doesn't allow, say, mysticism, where kind of more Orthodox, it kind of allows that and plays with that in some way.
Mm-hmm. Hey, maybe you should become Orthodox. Maybe you should search for it.
Become Orthodox. We'll all be Ortho bros.
Yeah. You have the Father Mark hair going on. I think you would look great, and
Yeah, but
Yeah, I just want to see you sing in Russian, dude. Honestly, like,
one day I'll play some Mola Dolce, I think it's called, Russian post-punk for you. But yeah, I'm even though I didn't say, I'm glad you brought that up because that is a good talking point.
gotcha. All right. Well, that is. Thank you, Pastor Trent, for that question. Hopefully, that is a sufficient answer for you. Hopefully, I've, bled David a little bit with the question because he didn't answer it. But he did answer it. But I was like, but you do reject. Anyway, whatever. We're moving on. Let's go to the next question. And this is, we have a couple questions from Hunter. And for people at home, Hunter is one of the people we went to lunch with when we visited the mega church. What was it called? Am I brain farting on this? Heights Church. That's what it's called.
Formerly Heights Baptist, no longer Heights Baptist. Just
yeah,
Heights.
It's just Heights. Anyway, so this question is mainly for Michael and David. He says, because he knows me, he knows how I'm going to answer this question. So he's asking you guys, out of the churches we visited, if you had to pick a favorite, which one would it be and why?
This is going to be long-winded here, so I'm preparing you.
Okay.
For me, it would be hard to say because each church had a different aspect and beauty to it, and each have their respective parts I appreciated. For example, with the Methodist Church, I grew up in that church. I saw my parents get married. I put my grandfather to rest, and I love the old building and all the memories and nostalgia that came up visiting there. And I think with Pastor Kendall, they are on a good path in being led in the right direction from his enthusiasm, his wonderful attitude, conversing, and I think he brings life into that church. And
it's probably the caffeine.
Hey, it don't matter. He was a wonderful person to talk with.
Yeah.
And kind of one of those conversations that plant a seed.
Mm-hmm.
Just like visiting the Anglican church. It was different enough from what we were used to, but also similar enough where it wasn't alien. And how that church came to be was a wonderful story. And again, I know the father had some apprehensions about talking with us.
You can just call him the priest, by the way.
Priest.
It's an interchangeable term. Like usually when you are saying him like his name in a sentence, you would say like Father Mark. But if you're referring to him as like the title, you would just say the priest.
Yeah.
Just for clarification.
But I'd say we had a wonderful conversation about it, about the history, and I felt welcomed in the service. It was a very small, quaint service, beautiful building, and a small road trip we took together. The Catholic Church was awe-inspiring. Walking into the higher church and just having to stand there and being taken aback by the beautiful architecture and the time and the effort and the historical context put forth. And then before the service, we were greeted and sat next to someone who had a hand in all of that, in restoring the old wood and the stained glass, and just the care that went into that church, and the history that Father Dwight talked to us about, and his vast knowledge of that was impactful. And just the whole experience was very awe-inspiring, and something I came home and I just had to think about, and even told one of my friends who was Catholic, hey, I know you're into, church architecture and history, and I think the interview we did, you would enjoy, and I believe you would enjoy the architecture there as well, especially being Catholic and just the care that went into it. And then visiting the Russian Orthodox church, it was quaint, but also it kind of hit that same chord in a different way that the Roman Catholic Church hit me. Just kind of having to stand there and soak it all in and just embrace everything around me and see the beauty that was there, and just watch how the liturgy proceeded and the chants, and kind of got me stuck in this trance-like state of just going with the flow and just being kind of mesmerized by it all. And then the humility that Father Mark showed in his answers, in the conversation, and then gathering after the service the next day and breaking bread with everybody, and the conversations we had with the different people whom we may never meet again.
Mm-hmm.
But we may. It was just a wonderful experience. And then with the Lutheran church, just first the interview, it felt like I was sitting with someone akin to my grandfather, speaking on things I never had the chance to. I never would have had the conversations with if it wasn't for this journey. And just the appreciation of the again, the architecture, the church, how everything was, and being all three of us welcomed into all these different churches with open arms and care. I could wax poetically about any of these experiences for hours, but at one point I was able to kind of point out my favorite, my not so favorite, but I think that does the experiences a disservice for me labeling like that the more and more I think about it and ponder on it.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think I can rate them or separate them. They're all just so unique and different that I don't think I can say I have a favorite.
Yeah, and we did
and
give
I'm
our
sorry
kind of
if that's long-winded, but
That's
that
okay.
opinion has changed as I've sat here and thought about it.
Yeah, we did kind of give our first impressions on like which are our favorites in the episode where we kind of reflected on our church visitations. Obviously those were more kind of hot off the press type thoughts, and this is, like 6 to 9 months later after we've recorded those episodes. So we've had a little bit more time to sit on it, and so obviously that may change things. But what about you, David?
Yeah. In a similar vein, and kind of, I'm glad you brought that episode up, still have more preference towards like the more kind of traditional with, say, the smells bells, stained glass, stuff like that, and like more kind of classic liturgy.
Right.
But
so
I
like the
also,
Catholic and Orthodox churches.
Yeah. Or even say less traditional, but like the Lutheran or Anglican, where there's still that
some
kind
of that's still there.
Yeah. But even I still appreciate, say, the Baptist or Pentecostal church, because it's very kind of easy to get into. You're not kind of overwhelmed. It's a
right.
I can
that's
see
part of that's
as a stepping stone.
Yeah, I would say that's part of the phronema of the church. Like the approach to that kind of quote unquote liturgy, even though they wouldn't call it liturgy, is they want it to be accessible and seeker friendly. Whereas like a Catholic or Orthodox church, like you're probably not going to end up there accidentally. Let's say.
Yeah. If you did, I can say from my experience with the Russian Orthodox, there's always someone that, because they kind of can tell a fish out of water, and they'll walk you through it. They'll explain if you have that, say, appreciation or
culture shock moment.
Yeah. So even though it looks more shocking, it's just as accepting. It's just kind of first impressions.
Yeah.
I guess you could say.
Yeah. And one thing I forgot to say was, and I also enjoyed the interview with Trent. It was great. We had some some would say controversial things, but also the sermon the next day, I've greatly enjoyed the sermon. And there's little bits of it that still stick through through all these months later, and y'all know how bad my memory is.
Yeah, that does
So to
speak words.
So to tell y'all that there's something about each of these churches that have stuck with me, and this experience that stuck with me throughout all these months, all the turbulent times in my life, the changing of the guard as such for me, that says a lot to this experience and what we've done and how far we have came as a group.
Yeah. Okay, so the next question I've labeled from Hunter, but it's technically from his wife, Julia, but Hunter's the one that sent it to me, but let's just know it's from Julia, whatever. Anyway, she asks, how did all three of y'all view church in general before visiting all different types, and how do you view church now? For example, like the stereotypes you used to have before versus after.
Not well. It's hard for me to say because it had been so long since I regularly went to any church. So doing this week in and week out for so long really kind of skews that, because I went in with a different mindset and a wanting to understand and learn. But for me, I used to view it as a drag of an obligation since I didn't believe and was just going for the culture / familial / social sake. And now I see church as something you should want to go to as an obligation to yourself and your faith, and to show appreciation and reverence and sometimes sorrow, and to bring upon a new day or week into your life and learn from past shortcomings and to listen more than anything. So I'd say my views on church and what it is and my viewpoints on it has changed drastically. I see the point of it and I understand it now. Yeah. And I think that's came a lot through this podcast, and especially through the experience that we've had throughout however long we've been doing this, because we record on Saturdays and then we would wake up early as all get out, go to the service, think about it, right back to record. And
it was a grueling few months, definitely.
But
it was fun.
Yeah, we woke up wanting to do it.
Yeah.
Because we are coming in with a more matured and open mindset.
Yeah.
And there's still some stereotypes that I still see from time to time. But that again, like any issue I see with the church, is more due to the imperfectness of man and modernity pushed into ancient traditions.
Yeah. So I would say that I also kind of had a similar perception of church. Like, church is just like the thing that you do because you're Christian, because you have to go. And I definitely think that I can still see that happening in some places. Like, going to church might seem like a drag because you just have to go and you don't really look forward to it. But I don't think I think in some way that might be reflective of your spiritual condition, but also I think it's more reflective of the tradition that you're a part of, if I'm being honest. I know that's maybe a little bit controversial, but when I grew up in the Baptist church, I didn't really look forward to going to church. It was kind of just like a thing that I had to do. And I will say, now going to, and maybe this has to do with age as well, but like now that I'm older, I've been attending this Orthodox church for 6 months now, and I still get excited to go. Like, I still look forward to going to the service because it's beautiful and I want to be a part of that. And so like, I think, part of how you feel about going to church is reflective of what that church is.
Yeah, because I definitely see the enthusiasm and the want to learn and to even socialize with the people you're going to church with, because every time we hop on a call, you have something new, something you've learned, some experience, and it's wonderful. I'm always super happy to hear about these experiences because it's watching that personal growth from the outside. Because I know my personal growth that I've went through, but it's beautiful to see it in someone else as well. And it's been a wonderful part to be a part of that process and kind of watch you in your journey grow to where you are spiritually now. Mm-hmm. And we're all far from finished.
Yeah.
In this. And so hopefully throughout the rest of the years, we continue to grow and have that want to know.
Yeah. What about you, David?
Yeah. Well, first to kind of go on to like when we were younger, having to go to church and stuff. I think it's also a little bit in how, say, churches handle children as well, because I mean, some churches you just gotta sit there. Some have like Bible study for the kids or for different age groups, and then some just kids are going to be kids, but they're here witnessing the service, kind of learning, even if it's slightly passively. I think that plays a lot into some of our perceptions and kind of our stereotypes. Start from there and then pop culture added on and whatnot.
Right.
And kind of like what Michael says, like, take for example, the old man that just sits in the back with the Bible, just asleep. Like, yeah, you'll see that. But kind of, instead of being, oh, well, that's the problem with the church, it's, oh, that person's just tired.
Yeah.
Or that person.
Well, if you make them stand, then they can't fall asleep. There you go.
I mean, true. But then they just might decide to go not attend that day. But, or they might just be doing it culturally, whatnot.
Right.
As we've spoken about.
Yeah. But, and you finished, David.
Yeah. But yeah, so kind of as Michael said, it's not necessarily that the stereotypes aren't there, but the kind of perspective on them has changed from it being more of a church problem to usually a person problem.
Yeah, I think that's a good point.
Yeah, and now I will say that obviously a lot of the captivation I had was due to either new experiences or just who was giving the sermon, who was doing the liturgy. Because in two of the churches, I'll be honest, I cannot tell you anything that they said. None at all. I was doing my best to pay attention. I just couldn't. But in every other, the pastor captivated me. The whole experience captivated me. And I never felt as if, oh, when is this over? Can we go? I never felt that in these other churches. And granted, some of that could be due to the smells and bells and like with the Catholic Church, how uniformly they move.
Yeah.
And the practice that goes into that. Or
yeah, I mean, like also like the Orthodox service, the liturgy that we went to, like it was a Russian church and they're pretty hardcore. So that was like a 3-hour service that you're standing through. And it didn't feel like 3 hours. Meanwhile, like some of those services were like an hour and it felt like forever.
Yeah. And I was completely captivated. Or when Pastor Trent or Pastor Kendall spoke, I was paying attention because their words captivated me.
Yeah.
Their whole, what they had to say, why it was being said, and the lesson captivated me. Now, granted, that could also be because I'm older and I'm looking, but I also say that shows a good trait to have for someone who is teaching.
Yeah.
Because if you can't captivate someone from the outside who wants to know and doesn't actively participate in this, how are you going to get the people who are here every week to listen and to really take what you're saying in and what you feel needs to be said?
Yeah.
And so hats off to the pastors that kept captivated, the lessons learned, and yeah.
All right. So his last question, I think, is probably a little bit directed more towards me. He asks, do you think it is a sin to go into a place that is quote unquote haunted, seeking a supernatural experience? Okay. So I will admit I have kind of fluffled a bit on this question because I, at one point in time, would have said no. But I also lacked some of the spiritual discernment that I have now. So I'm going to give sort of a half answer, and maybe it won't be super satisfying, but I will say, and I will echo, that the Bible forbids necromancy. And so what is necromancy? Well, at its simplest terms, we can say it is communicating with the dead or trying to get information out of the dead about the future. So if you're trying to, so for example, if I would give a couple of scenarios which are absolutely definitely sinful. So doing a seance, for example, consulting oracles. These are kind of like biblical examples that are still around today. Like, these are definitely sin. It gets into a gray area when you come to paranormal, because you're not really trying to, I guess depending on who you are, but like in my scenario, when I was with the paranormal team, I wasn't necessarily trying to speak with the dead to get information about the future out of them. It's like I was trying to understand their life and put together pieces of history that have been lost to time. And there have been cases, for example, where paranormal evidence has been used in court. Now, obviously, some people are not going to believe that and not take that as actual evidence because they don't believe in the paranormal. But I think there are definitely sinful inclinations. If you are, I think the way that Hunter phrased this question, if you're going into a place that is haunted, seeking a supernatural experience in the way that like you're looking for something, maybe like in a religious sense, I definitely think that is sinful. Now, as far as whether or not, so I guess I've kind of cut off the corners here and said like, this is sinful, this is sinful, this is sinful. I guess I'm kind of beating around the bush about whether or not like investigating in the paranormal is sinful. I don't know. If I'm being honest with you, I don't know. I don't know if there are contexts in which it is okay or in which it is not okay, or if it's just always wrong. I don't know if there is a blanket answer on that, and my opinion is kind of changing about that. That was one of the things that kind of concerned me ethically a little bit when I was a paranormal investigator. As I got older into that, like when I was young and first starting, I didn't think anything of it. But one of the other team members was like, this is kind of like necromancy, like modern day necromancy. And it kind of conflicted him, and he ran the group. And, that by virtue kind of made me think, like maybe this is not really right. Maybe this is just a modern form of necromancy. And so I really don't know. Like I said, my opinion is changing. I could be wrong, but I will say that definitely those areas like consulting oracles or using a Ouija board or doing seances, these are definitely sinful. And also, seeking supernatural experience in the way that you would like seek experience from God. Those are definitely sinful inclinations and should be avoided. But as far as whether or not the whole thing is sinful, I don't know. I could be wrong, but that may change. So that's kind of a long-winded answer to that.
Yeah.
I don't know if you
think
guys
it would
have anything to add to it.
It would also depend on what you define as the supernatural and what you define as haunted. Because I, as well as many other people I know, will go visit deceased family members' grave sites and just kind of talk like I'm talking to that person, or just get out whatever's going on, or, go there to clear the mind and the heart, just as one would meditate. And I mean, I think it really depends on your definition of supernatural, because religion in itself is a very supernatural thing. It's outside of our bounds and understanding.
Yeah.
And so I wouldn't say what I do, and obviously I'm not the end all be all what's sinful, because I'm still figuring all this shit out. But like, I wouldn't say what I do, which is, speaking to somebody that you miss. Like, hey, Pops, yeah, shit's been kind of bad lately. Figured I'd come, just say a few words, check on your flowers, miss you, man. Chest bump, fist bump, get out of there. I wouldn't see something
that's a good point.
Like that as sinful, because, I mean, it's just a way of processing emotions and getting them out. I'm not necessarily seeking for them to reach out and go, hey man, what's up? But there have been times where I've done things like that, and I have felt like something else was there. Whether it's just the way the breeze blew, or just that feeling like everything's going to be okay.
Yeah.
And
all right.
I've also worked and lived in haunted ass places, so maybe that skews my viewpoint.
Yeah.
So,
All right. Well, thank you, Hunter, for your questions, and also Julia for your question. Let's go ahead and move on to questions from Jack. My friend Jack asks two very poignant questions. I think they're both more directed towards me. So we've had a few questions from Michael and David. I guess it'll be good to kind of balance it out here, maybe. So his first question is, why do you think there's a fad for spirituality, but minus the religion? And boy, howdy.
Ooh,
Sorry, go ahead. What were you going to say, David?
I think it's kind of issues we've stated about, say, kind of organized religion, and kind of people not exactly knowing / people believing there's a hierarchical kind of hidden knowledge, I guess you could say, which is why I say like more of like the modern Gnostic movements and kind of Western esotericism is kind of fad. Thanks, Aleister Crowley, for making up your own religion. And
okay, so I have thoughts on this, and
I think we all do, which is surprising.
Yeah, so I really have. This is actually a question that someone else asked if we would do an episode on a while back, but I didn't feel like we had enough to say on it, so I didn't make it a whole episode. But I have a few things to say, so I wrote a few things out here. So let me go into that. So I think people are naturally religious and have religious inclinations. Sometimes this manifests in formal religion, sometimes it manifests in political activism, and other times it manifests in so-called spirituality. Now, the reason religion, in my opinion, has fallen out of favor is because it has become synonymous with the Republican Party. Ergo, the shortcomings of the Republican Party have become synonymous with Christianity. On top of this, there have been numerous sex scandals in Christian spheres of influence, and the culture wars over gay marriage, transgenderism, and abortion have added to sort of the damaging perspective of Christianity, I would say. So the primary reason people aren't religious is a hesitation to shift their political views. Spirituality, on the other hand, is less mainstream, it's harder to define, and doesn't have the baggage that traditional religion has. It's easier to be spiritual, just like it's easier to be agnostic. It's the path of least resistance, seems to meet some spiritual religious need, and also may appear to virtuous to others. Postmodern philosophical views such as relativism, syncretism, and left-leaning ideologies also play into this phenomenon. So my perspective is that the whole spiritual but not religious crowd is highly narcissistic. It's entirely self-centered, it has no obligations to others or to the world, and essentially allows people to pick and choose what they want to do and believe. Some of these same criticisms can be lodged at Protestants who have divorced themselves from tradition as well. So what the spiritual crowd doesn't realize, though, is that becoming Christian, for example, isn't just about changing their political and religious views. It's about changing them. It's about conforming their will to the will of God. But that's too much work, so they'll just stick with being spiritual.
Yeah. I love how you brought up kind of self-centeredness, because that's kind of how spirituality, at least for the past century, has been with the movements I talked about, Crowley, modern Satanism, and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's in more recent years, people are more kind of vocal about, but it has been kind of a force since, I think, at least late 1800s.
Mm-hmm.
And certain circles, usually more kind of aristocratic, artsy circles.
Yeah, and I would say one reason is due to previously it was very binary. Either you were this or you were nothing. And then a lot of atheists became atheists not because they believed there was nothing, but that's what they wanted to label themselves as because it was trendy. It was, in their circle. Just
they
like
wanted
some
to define
people,
themselves in opposition to the dominant Christian religion.
Yeah. To what they opposed, let's say, with the Catholic Church and the sex scandals that have happened, or the fire and brimstone type that dominate the South.
And the scandals that happen.
Then they quickly realize they still believe in something, much like myself. But the difference is a lot of people who are quote unquote spiritual don't want to grow. So it's hard to call them spiritual at all.
Oof.
Because spirituality is about both personal insight and personal growth in that realm. Just because I would disagree, and agnosticism is safe and easy. It's fucking terrifying when you think about it. You don't know.
Well, in context, I would mean like if you're just agnostic because you don't want to make a decision, I would not classify you as in that safe, easy position because you're changing. But other people that are just like, I don't know, I don't want to think about it, so I'll be agnostic. Those are the safe and easy agnostics.
I mean, might as well identify yourself as an atheist.
That's an issue that's prevailed through even Christianity, and really every religion is, I don't want to think about it, I'll just follow this. Or I don't want to think about it, I won't follow anything. But it's just became more prevalent in modern times because of the ever-growing America that we live and the retort against organized religion after all the issues that have came. And I would say we spoke about this in the issues with Christianity in America and the shortcomings that has happened due to the imperfectness of man. And so that either they want to follow a status quo, that it's trendy now to be spiritual and to have crystal necklaces and all that dumb shit, or they don't want to think about it, so they'll just go, yeah, man, I'm spiritual.
Yeah. One other thing I would say about it being self-centered. Another reason I say that it's self-centered is because people who are spiritual look inward to themselves for their spiritual questions. They look inside and try and find answers from within. That's extremely selfish. If you compare this to a Christian context, they're looking to God for those answers, not themselves. And if you're looking at yourself, that's extremely narcissistic, and that is very indicative of a larger problem within culture, I think.
Yeah, and it's funny you bring that up because a lot of people would say that like the more Aborigine or Native Americans were very spiritual, which they were, but they also had a religion. And God was kind of embodied by the earth in sorts. And I think it would be, it's kind of a disservice to call the narcissistic make your own God category as spiritual.
Yeah.
It's very belittling to actual spirituality.
Yeah, they just need to read Anton Lavey if they want to feel like that way.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also, again, most people are inclined to look for something besides themselves.
Yeah.
And if they can't find that, they'll look inside of themselves. Whereas David's just like, no.
Yeah, so that was a very good question, Jack. I appreciate the question. Now I'm going to move on to his other question, which is a little bit more fleshed out and maybe will require more of a fleshed out answer as response. So he says, historically, artwork has been used in the church to enhance worship and connect people to the divine. Now the focus is on music, and all the artwork has been reduced to marketing for the church. Why do you think that is? Do you think that art has become more secular, or why do you think that art has become more secular as opposed to religious? Do you think the church has developed an aversion to art due to various taboo movements and secular artwork? Okay, so I have a lot of thoughts on this. I'm going to go ahead and give my thoughts, and I'll let you go. Right. So to kind of pad this out for context, I'm going to talk about a little bit of historical context because there is historical context, historical precedent for this. So in the first millennium, both music and artwork were used in the liturgical worship of the church. During the 8th and 9th centuries, however, icons were opposed, likely due to the influence of Islam, which is a highly iconoclastic religion. As a result, emperors outlawed the use of icons in the church and even went as far as to destroy them and attack those who supported icons. That's actually what iconoclast means, icon smashers. Empress Theodora eventually reinstated the veneration of icons once her iconoclast husband died, and the Seventh Ecumenical Council in 843 officially ruled against the iconoclasts. This day was eventually celebrated in the liturgical calendar as the triumph of orthodoxy. St. John of Damascus stated, quote, "I do not worship matter, but the creator of matter, who for my sake became material and deigned to dwell in matter, who through matter effected my salvation," end quote. Now I say all this as a preface to set the stage. An inclination against iconography and sacred art has a historical pretext. So fast forward to the Reformation, and this whole debate comes back with a vengeance. Luther was for icons, but Calvin and Zwingli were strongly opposed to them. For historical context, Calvin is the father of Reformed theology, a massive branch of Protestant Christianity. Presbyterians are Reformed, for example. Zwingli didn't actually establish any churches, but he strongly influenced later reformers, and his influence can most clearly be linked to Baptist churches. Now, fast forward to today. Many churches are white-walled and ugly because their founders were against iconography. They didn't understand the theology behind icons or the difference between veneration and worship. But icons served a spiritual purpose. Without them, these spiritual needs are not getting met. Meanwhile, music is still being used in most of these Protestant churches to one degree or another. As people have a spiritual yearning, the music becomes the medium of choice. Music alone becomes what music and icons used to be for previous generations. As a bit of a plug, the Orthodox Church uses both music and icons, and both are of equal importance to our theology. Now, as far as why artwork has become a more secular medium than religious, I think the Catholic Church had its heyday with artwork during the Renaissance. Now, I can't speak much for Catholics, but I do know that there is a very intentional meaning behind the art style in Orthodoxy. There is a reason iconographers choose that specific art direction as opposed to others, and those reasons are largely to express theological truths. So I believe there may be some innate inclination towards some art styles over others when it comes to religious art, because for many, artwork is a means of expressing theology first and aesthetic beauty second. This is likely why religious artwork doesn't follow secular trends. I know that was a long-winded answer, but hopefully it was good.
Yeah.
Also, one thing I do agree with, especially in the separation of the churches, really did a damage to artwork in the church, because it's obvious the churches we visited were vastly different for a reason,
right?
But also, I think another issue is in modern culture, in the Christian ethos, that even people are more swayed emotionally by music.
Mm-hmm.
It's more captivative. It's easier to get people to enter a church through music or through a different medium, like a game or a cool website or things like that, than it is to captivate them with a beautiful painting anymore. We, due to modernity, maybe not us three, but most people don't take the time to sit there and to think about what that painting is, what it means, what it symbolizes, the work that went into making that. I mean, when we went to both the Orthodox and Catholic Church, we just stood there in silence for a little bit, just taking it and appreciating it. And I guarantee we could go back to the same two churches 100 times and see different things that we didn't pick up on the first time.
Yeah.
But we're looking to appreciate that, because to us, that is beautiful. That captivates us. But in modern times, since that hasn't been a part of the modern, I'm putting quotes, versions of Christianity that have came forth, it doesn't, and also in pop culture and in the world around, art is for the elite to buy, or we're oversaturated with it through our technology, so we don't take the time to appreciate it.
Yeah, one other thing I wanted to add is I think it's indicative of the broader phronema of that church and tradition. So, for example, like you were mentioning, it's easier to get people in the door with certain types of music. That is indicative of the fact that, your more secular megachurch type churches, their main goal is getting people in the doors. And that is their main drive. Now, you may be able to get those people in the door, but you're not going to get them. Maybe you will, maybe you won't, but you're going to have a much harder time getting them plugged in deeply and getting them grounded in a theological tradition that has a deep historical root. So these churches that, use music as a means of kind of, maybe, and I'm not saying this is true of all mega churches, but there are definitely some that are extremely emotionally manipulative. So I'm thinking of, for example, Father Andrew Stephen Damick. He's an Orthodox priest. He used to be Protestant, and he once, like in his teen years, he was a stagehand, and he realized there was a problem in Protestantism when he saw people like going forward for the altar call, which is strange because there's usually no altar in these Protestant churches. He thought it was very strange because he's like, I'm a stagehand. I know how to evoke that emotional response from people. And that's what they're doing in these churches. And so this idea that you're having this spiritual experience, that's just like, yeah, there's a spiritual context to music, but that's not really a deep spiritual experience like you think it is. That's a surface level experience. I'm not saying that you can't have, profound moments when listening to certain songs in these kind of scenarios, but it is a thing to be weary of.
Yeah, it's more that they're hearing and not listening, if that makes sense. It's two different things. I can hear music, but if I'm actually listening, I'm processing and breaking it down.
Right.
And I agree, it's easy to get them in the door with emotions, but emotions are fleeting and leaving quickly. Because even in like the church camps we went to as kids, none of us wanted to go up there.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't feel the inclination to go, and well, I'm not going to say all of us because I didn't know 99% of these people. I just knew the group I was with. But it was more of those emotional strings being pulled, and then the social hierarchical strings being pulled to bring people forward. People like me. I walked up there and I didn't even fucking believe in the shit. That's the
whole altar call thing. Like that's just an emotional ploy to get people to come forward. And
whereas
I don't know. That's one of the things. I don't know. I don't mean to slander people. It's just I don't. In my experience, certain sectors of Protestantism, some of them, we didn't feel that emotional thing going on. We didn't feel that manipulation. But in others, it was there. Yeah,
it was there.
Like they just, like the pastor just stands there and keeps playing the music over and over until somebody comes forward.
Oh God. But I will, for everybody at home, those were the very, very small minority. Okay?
Yeah.
But and I think also we don't, even in places where there is beautiful artwork, it's easy just to take it for granted and not to soak it in and appreciate it. Whereas luckily we came in there with the intentions to converse and have dialogue and to learn. And so we were already coming in there with the intentions to soak it all in, soak the experience in.
Yeah.
And we're way more objective focused now than we are to just take it as it comes and appreciate everything.
Yeah. David, I know you were going to answer the question before I answered it. I don't know if we've taken all the thunder from you, but did you have any thoughts?
Well, I was going more into the angle Michael was going with. Also, think of like in modern world, who makes like, who would we think traditionally makes like drawn art? We think of like a elite aristocrat, I guess you could say. And like art shows are hoity-toity. A blue canvas sells for $1 million. And I guess for a lot of them, since a lot of it's kind of that rejection of like modern wealth and that kind of mindset.
Yeah.
Kind of anti-aristocrat, I guess you could say.
Yeah. Also, if you look at like art history, like eventually it got to a point where it's just revolting against the principles of what made art.
Yeah.
There was these elites that made the standard of this is beautiful art, and then there were people who revolted against that standard and tried to do the very opposite of that,
and were hated. But then some rich person's like, I like movement.
That. It sucks. All Dada art is terrible.
Or like surrealism.
Your toilet is not artwork. Sorry, I forget the guy's name, but anyway.
Yeah. Well, because
mine is if you want to buy it.
So is it art because it projects that kind of idea to you that I hate this? Because art's all about projecting an emotion, or in some contexts, a spiritual experience. And also, Michael brought, like, for example, websites, games. Accessibility is another major one, because to have a beautiful work of art, it's a lot more money than just sharing a MP3 file to someone, or a
shitty JPEG.
Yeah, or
I might be. Because I know Jack likes some modern art, so I might be a little bit contrarian to his opinion on this here. But I think when you splatter random paintbrushes on a canvas and call it art, or like you draw like 3 squares and make each of them a different color, like that's not art. I'm sorry. That's ugly. And it's not there. It takes no talent to make it. I think to be art, like it has to invoke some inner sense of awe and beauty, and it has to take some serious skill to create that not everyone can create.
I wouldn't even say on beauty, just some sort of thought besides why.
A different perspective.
Now, sometimes why, yeah.
So, like, someone drawing those 3 cubes, it's a different perception on what they might see beautiful, because I might see 3 squares, different colors, like, oh, that looks nice. That makes me happy. And
congratulations, you can draw straight lines.
Hey,
that's really hard.
As a left-handed person, that's really hard.
Just get a ruler.
Oh, but then who's to say, like, in modern sense, glitch art? Oh, it's just people messing up a picture.
What about NFTs?
I won't say that all modern art sucks, but a lot of it does.
A lot of it's money laundering. I don't give a shit what anyone says.
Yeah, you're probably right.
It's just for rich people to launder money. Just like NFTs. They're just glorified money laundering right now. Okay. That little thing isn't worth $100,000 because I can download it and put it on my computer too. And you can't do nothing about it. Who says you have rights? Nobody.
Well,
but before we get on that little diatribe there,
thank you.
To move on to the next one?
Thank you for your question, Jack. It was definitely, both of them were very thought-provoking, and I had to do a little bit of homework before I answered those, so thanks, I guess. Anyway, we'll move on to the next one. Okay, so our next to last group of questions is from someone we know all too well. Me.
Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah, so I've got 2 questions for us. One's for me, one's for you guys. And this is just kind of a hypothetical question that I imagine some people that might ask this question. And the first one is, why do we focus so heavily on philosophical arguments for God's existence and Christian apologetics early on in the podcast? Why don't we talk more about personal religious experience? Now, this is one of those things that I don't know if I've mentioned on the podcast or not, but for me, and this is maybe something I would do a little bit differently now if I were to do this kind of show now. But, hindsight's 2020, and I look back at the structure of the show and the way things transitioned from one topic to another and one theme to another, and I think it's really beautiful the way the show kind of flowed, and I'm appreciative of the way that we structured it. But I can definitely understand that there might be some people who are like, why are you talking about these heady philosophical arguments for God's existence? Like, that's very abstract and impersonal, and you're not really going to argue anyone over to the Christian faith. So my response to this is, number one, that was indicative of the mindset that I was in at that time. So I had just come out of kind of a stage in my life where I was really questioning a lot of things about Christianity, because I asked, things like, how do I know God exists? How do I know Jesus rose from the dead? How do I know the Bible is reliable? And I was asking the fundamental presuppositions of all religious belief, essentially. And I came across, these arguments for God's existence and the evidence for the resurrection and things like this that really convicted me and convinced me that there are rational reasons to believe in God that are not just emotional, personal experiences, that these are like objective arguments for God's existence. And if you don't have a better explanation for these arguments, then this is the more likely worldview. And so that is kind of a means of, these arguments have been kind of a means of progressing the conversation, I think, for us in a more objective sense. And it does kind of keep it impersonal. But there also are personal experiences that I've had that are, like what I believe to be God acting in my life. And those kinds of things, while I think they're good in niche scenarios, I don't think that they're going to be convincing to everyone because they're inherently subjective. So my personal experiences, I can tell you guys about them, but you might be like, okay, cool. I don't relate to that because that's your experience, not mine. And so in a world where people are constantly succumbing to moral relativism, your truth is your truth, my truth is my truth, that's not going to convince anyone. What I want to do is kind of get to the bedrock and say, there is objective truth, and these arguments get at that. And that's mainly why I focused on that.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys have thoughts on it.
Yeah, I mean, that's also why, like, where we start where we started, like, let's go over the introduction, but start out, say, the beginning of the universe.
Right.
And it's like...
we went way back.
Kind of like a timeline of, as you said, evidence for belief.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I actually wrote a quick little answer to the question because I feel we did a bit of both throughout the series. Mm-hmm. Obviously, especially in like our post-church breakdowns or like different experiences throughout all of this. But I feel we really focus on the philosophical arguments because we as humans are imperfect. And being so, it's easy to miss one's feelings and experiences since they are but a fleeting thing. And it's also beneficial to learn the philosophy, whether you buy into it or not, because that is how we learn from each other and mend the gap, so to say. And also because people lie about their experiences. Look at Juicy Smollett lied about a quote-unquote experience he had, and that created a whole political narrative within itself.
Yeah. And
also because I feel all of us enjoy philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
And that gives you, once you understand philosophy and what it means and how it equates to the world, that gives you a firmer rock to stand on versus just floating on emotions. And that's also why I see why some denominations hold more credence to me over others. Because some, again, are emotionally manipulative or rely too much on emotion and personal experience instead of getting to the core of it.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
But I do feel we did a fair bit of both as we progressed.
Yeah, definitely. It did kind of start off more like philosophical arguments for God's existence and these kinds of things. And then it went more into kind of personal experiences after we visited these churches and kind of gave our opinions. And even like in the background of like the politics episodes, we kind of mentioned personal belief reasons. Like even we covered a lot of ground in a lot of these episodes. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next question. And this is for you guys. This is the big one for a lot of people at home probably want to know. Is there any denomination or tradition that you could see yourself joining in the future? If so, why? And if not, why not? So kind of the question that we asked probably back in either the cost of commitment or reflections on our church visitations and pastoral interviews of what doors are still opened and which ones are closed for you guys.
Well, for me, I'm going to be up front. Pastor Trent, I enjoyed your service, but I don't think I could fall into anything with Calvinism. So Presbyterian, you're out. The Holy Rollers, you're out. Baptist, you're out. Lutheran, the doors half closed, but I do see merit there.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not super keen on some things in the Methodist Church, but that could change. I do see myself leaning more towards, if I was to become Protestant, possibly Anglican, because I obviously, as we have discussed, prefer the more traditional style of service and the more historical aspects to it.
Not to interrupt you here too much, but just it's interesting you mentioned that, because when I was kind of on my journey towards orthodoxy, I was like, I'm either, like the doors that were open for me were either Orthodox, Catholic, or Anglican. And if I'm going to be Protestant still, I'll become Anglican. And the reason for that is I felt like it was the most there was the most historical continuity with Anglicanism out of all of Protestantism in general. But at the end of the day, I still had problems with the solas and the general Protestant things. And so that kind of got rid of that. And then obviously I had problems with Catholicism and some of the papal things. And so that eventually landed me where I am now. But it's interesting you mentioned that.
Yeah, and then I'd put currently Catholicism or Orthodox are probably about the same. The reason I say that is this is still an ongoing journey. I could have something happen in the Baptist for all I know, but what I do know is currently that's kind of where I'd put Lutheran and Methodist right next to each other, then Anglican, then...
So you would say Lutheran and Methodist are like at the bottom, but the door's still open.
Yeah.
And then you would put Anglican above that, and then Catholic and Orthodox are kind of tied above that.
Yeah. And
okay, cool.
No, that's just how I'm leaning at this moment. That could change tomorrow for all I know.
Right.
But I do appreciate the more liturgical processions and the more historical aspects, because that's a large part of religion is history.
Yeah.
And also, the further back you can trace something, the more you can know this has stayed the same.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I really enjoyed speaking with like Father Dwight, because he was so historically knowledgeable, and I appreciated the Orthodox Church because it can be traced back not to 1800s, not the 1900s, not the 1700s. It can be traced all the way back.
Yep.
All the way back. So, yeah. And I'm also not going to go into Messianic Judaism. So there's that door closed too.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Just out of curiosity, since you've moved to Atlanta, have you visited any Orthodox or Catholic churches?
I have not. I've mainly been a homebody.
Gotcha.
But my biggest...
I'm sure you got options there.
Yeah.
If you wanted to.
And I mean, there's a beautiful church in the downtown area where the couple homeless people sit on the benches out up front. But I'm still more so focusing on the journey aspect and figuring out where I fall spiritually and kind of working out the issues I have.
Yeah. I would definitely recommend at some point maybe visiting some churches and getting to know some people. I know it's going to be a little weird, like, being there kind of by yourself and getting to know people, but I bet you'll find somebody that'll maybe help you along your way.
Yeah. And plus I have I have a bunch of great resources. I got a bunch of books. I got you to talk to.
Yeah.
And a lot of the people we have interviewed are always open for an arm to be reached out and questions to be asked, which again, appreciate the humility and hospitality. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at.
Gotcha.
What about you, David? Are any of these doors open? Are they all closed? Do you know? Do you don't know?
I mean,
is it just the void?
If, say, in the future, I do become, say, Christian, kind of in the same realm, kind of both of y'all are, though, if y'all seen the episode kind of reflecting on these visitations, we kind of all are in agreement of the more kind of traditional liturgical services are more preferable.
Yeah.
But if you had to pick one, David.
So just one other question. So have you shut doors on churches, like, for sure? Like, if you were, hypothetically speaking, if you're to become Christian, let's say you have to become Christian tomorrow, are there churches that you're not going to join? And are there churches, basically, like, which kind of like Michael, for the sake of the hypothetical, what are the doors that are open?
Yeah. Well, pretty much exactly what Michael. I mean, for Lutheran, I'd have to do more research into it personally.
Mm-hmm.
But it's kind of like it's there, but not a prime possibility.
Right.
And then with, say, Anglican and like Methodist, kind of in the same area of each other personally, would have to go to services and make my mind up. But right now, lean more towards, say, like Orthodoxy compared to, say, like Catholicism.
Yeah, and you also didn't have
just
the
for
luxury.
Sorry, just for clarification, are you saying like you're leaning more towards Orthodoxy than Catholicism, or that they're both equal for you?
Well, more towards Orthodoxy because,
okay,
kind of in my viewpoint, like some of the papal problems. I think we've spoken about this.
Mm-hmm.
We definitely have.
Whether on or off the mic, we've definitely talked about it.
Yeah, kind of with similar kind of arguments against it. I have. As to you, say, in the hypothetical, I found God exists and gotta become a Christian the next day. Oh no, or I'm going to hell.
Right.
If baby Jesus pops up in your bedroom and goes, "Sup, motherfucker?"
Now that would
You
be
don't
a
believe in me?
sight to see.
Oh no. Okay.
But yeah,
But
but if
I'll let
it
Father Mark
was
know.
Protestant, it would be more liturgical. More, they have the history to kind of prove hasn't really changed too much.
Yeah.
And
Cool.
and
Yeah.
one bonus is you get to come home smelling like beautiful incense.
Dude, I get in my
Like-
car and I'm like, why does it smell like incense? It's like, oh yeah, it's because I've been to church all week.
I wore the same shirt that I wore to service to work as like an undershirt.
Yeah.
A
Does it still
polo
smell
under
like
my polo.
incense?
Oh man, it was beautiful.
Yeah,
It was
if there
wonderful.
wasn't
I
a
love
shortage,
the
I would get
smell.
me some frankincense and myrrh, but there's a little bit of shortage nowadays.
Yeah. Gotcha. Well, I think that was
But
a
yeah,
good answer.
It's kind of funny. We all, even though we're all three in vastly different areas of our journeys, we all kind of lean similarly in our appreciations and historical
Yeah.
relevance.
Yeah. Even though like our present positions on things are very different. And I think all of our, probably most, if not all three of our positions have changed since we started this show a little bit. It's just interesting that even though we still have, we're standing on different ground now, we're still oriented in the same direction.
Or we at least have the same appreciation, kind of in
Yeah.
the same direction.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because granted, there are some things that no matter the denomination, even if you are a Christian, you have to get over to become a member. Like the
Right.
process you're going through.
Yeah. I mean, there's some things I'm having
There's
to
changes.
yeah. It's
You're
a
having-
process.
You might struggle with this and you might excel at this, but you're making that dedication and that effort forward to do that.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's funny that we're all kind of aligning in similar directions in the hypothetical sense.
Yeah. So those were my two questions. And as we wrap up here, we've got a few questions from the one, the only, the Michael. So
Yes.
I think these are very good questions and definitely topical. So his first question is, how has this experience actually, do you want me to read these? Do you want to read them?
Shit, I'll read them.
Okay, go ahead.
All right, for our first question. How has this experience between the three of us changed our viewpoints on each other's beliefs and stances on religious topics? Example, how we viewed David's take on atheism before and after the podcast, or how we viewed my journey as an agnostic. How has this experience changed your viewpoint on religion overall? David, Bailey?
I'll let David go first.
Ah.
I got to think about it.
Yeah. I guess it's at least for, say, like Michael, your standpoint, yours has become a bit more, say, nuanced and just, I don't know. It's like, oh, I know, I have an idea of where I'm heading. I'm just not quite sure. And Bailey, yours has also just become more defined. And kind of my viewpoint, especially with experience these situations with you and have a little bit more in-depth talks, I guess we could say, because we've always talked about this, but sometimes not as in much detail.
Right. So I think I would probably agree with David on like kind of Michael's agnosticism, for example. Like I would say that kind of going into things like you didn't really know where you stood, but you knew where you didn't stand, I guess. And then like as time has gone on, you've kind of moved a little bit to say like, well, I used to believe this, but now I definitely don't believe that. And now I'm a little bit closer to believing this, but I'm not quite there yet. And so, like David said, I would say it's definitely become more nuanced. And I can definitely say personally, because like I've never really, I guess, officially been in an agnostic position myself. But I have been in a position where I can kind of, I've questioned my theological beliefs. So I think there's a sort of a similarity there. There's a little bit of a congruence, but it's not exactly the same. So I know that from experience, the existential angst that comes from that is real. And I respect the fact that you're on the journey and that you're willing to ask those questions and come to some hard conclusions, because like, for example, for myself, I kind of had to come to some hard conclusions that I maybe not necessarily wanted to come to because of the implications of what it would mean if I believed in those things. And I'm learning more and more every day about how there's a lot of things that I need to change and a lot of things that I need to work on. And so I respect that, you're doing that. For David, oh boy, here we go. So I think also kind of in retrospect, going into the show, I knew like some vague basis of why you were atheist, but there were a couple episodes where we distinctly like specifically zeroed in on that question, and we were like, why are you an atheist? And we drilled you, me and Michael, at the same time, just grilling you on like, why are you an atheist? Why do you believe this? And I think we brought up quite a few points that, if I'm honest, I don't think we're fully answered. I think like I understand why you object to Christianity, for example. Like I understand your objections to Christianity. There's episodes where we've covered those objections, and I don't think that they're unanswerable. But I don't see how that gets you to atheism necessarily. So I still think that a more respectable position would be agnosticism, because you're not really saying yes or no either way, but I think you're just kind of defaulting to atheism. And I don't really know what exactly that reason is, other than a lack of experience. But as we talked about in why atheism is absurd, like you have a burden of proof for that. Like, why do you think that God doesn't exist? Like you still have a burden of proof. So I think as things have gone on, that's kind of how my perception of your journeys has changed a little bit. It's not that I don't respect your journey or anything, David. It's just that like I don't think you're justified in being an atheist at this point. I think like if you really want to be an atheist, you have to have a solid because it's really hard to hold philosophically and consistently. Anyway, I think that's probably that. I guess that's the first question. How has this experience changed your viewpoint on religion overall? It's I think it's made me more firm in my beliefs just in general. I think that's probably the short answer to that.
What about you, David? How has it changed your viewpoint on religion overall? If it has.
I mean, kind of, I think as I've stated previously, not really change it, but I can at least have a better appreciation and kind of understanding.
So you're leaving with more knowledge on the religions and the understanding of like why Bailey is converting to
like
Orthodoxy.
Say some denominations it's not all doom and gloom like, oh, they're really wrong. It's like, oh, okay, they just think a little bit differently. Because I mean, where we grew up, it's like, oh, you're not this, you're going to hell.
Yeah.
Yeah. And would you say that this experience has made you...
Did you answer that question, Michael, by the way?
Oh, I can throw a quick answer.
Yeah.
I thought about... Well, for me, we'll start with David. And I think this really harkened back to that debate we listened to where the atheist was kind of just...
Oh, for people at home, it was Christopher Hitchens versus William Lane Craig.
No. Both of these guys seem like assholes. But I didn't feel right with the atheist calling himself an atheist for the simple fact he didn't completely remove the possibility of God when questioned about it. And that alone would put you more in, there's 4 schools of thoughts. There's atheism, agnostic atheism, theism, agnostic theism. The non-agnostic sides are 100%. There's no doubt. The agnostic side is there's a possibility. And in agnostic theism, there's multiple possibilities. But an agnostic atheist, currently sees that there is no God, but leaves the door open for God to be there. And so I assumed David was more in the just standard atheist wheelhouse. But the more we've gone through this experience, the more I would put you into an agnostic atheist wheelhouse. You're leaving some room there to either transition to agnostic theism or even theism within itself. You haven't closed all the doors. And so that's what made it hard when some people wanted us to have like a militant atheist, but that also made it more open for some of these pastors to have these interviews because you weren't that militant atheist. And I think that's something me and Bailey have joked on so many times throughout this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I mean, as I like to see it, I'm only human. I can be wrong about everything. So it would be kind of stupid to leave that, just close that door immediately and be like, nope, I can't be wrong about this. Just like with, say, like my political viewpoints or kind of my emotions, like, oh yeah, I can be definitely wrong about anything. Is it okay
You're
to be wrong?
very agnostic.
Yeah, I guess in some sense.
And for you, Bailey, I obviously respected your religion and your conviction as friends. Mm-hmm. But it's through this that I've got a better understanding of where you stand in your journey within it, because it didn't all just start here. You didn't just go to church one day and have all this. It's right. A constant journey. And I applaud you for that, because through your convictions, you're making life changes. And I mean, just even in the past couple of weeks, all the things you're doing due to your commitment to orthodoxy and your transition, really give yourself a pat on the... I mean, dude, most people won't do that shit to save their life. And I mean, coming from where we come from with contemporary Christianity, it's a drastic change. And I know you probably had a little worry or anxiety about it when you first started this journey of wondering where you fit in a church and what denomination or tradition. But it's nice to see that transition, and it's a very beautiful thing. And I'm glad to have been able to witness it.
Thank you.
And on the second point,
also just to kind of add to that, that's partly why I wanted to do this podcast, is because I saw an opportunity to kind of because like the conversations we were having before we were recording this podcast, like they were only getting so far, you know? So like I felt like if we concentrated things on like certain points, there's a lot more that I could lay out and discuss with you to kind of build a more fully fleshed out explanation of my worldview and how I got to where I am, and kind of having the conversation of like, a lot of our conversations were reflections of thoughts that I've had, and, you know, kind of going back and forth in my head on certain things. And so I just saw a lot of opportunity with structuring the podcast in the way that we have to fill in those gaps with the conversations that we were having in general and kind of directing it in a certain way.
Yeah, and also there's only so much you can say getting off of work, hanging out with the dudes, drinking, eating pizza, and drunkenly talking until 5 o'clock in the morning about religion.
Yeah.
Only so much you can say if it's not structured. And so I'm glad we took this step and structured, and especially on your end, structuring all of this, setting everything up. Like, bravo.
Thank you.
And I would say how this changed my view on religion, it strengthened what I know I'm not, what I know I don't believe, and what I know I won't be indoctrinated by. But it also gave me an appreciation for a different side that isn't as covered, for the more person level side of religion. Because yes, I can be against organizations and still stand firmly on that and what they've done. But also I can appreciate the people from within, that the little people, the little guy. Like a father at one church doing his work in the community. One hand shall not know what the other does, and being very humble and welcoming with open arms. It's made me appreciate those human experiences we have even more, the conversations we've had even more. It really gave me something to think about. But it also enforced what I know what I don't want to find in a religion, which is pride, self-centeredness, and a lack of humility. So yeah, I would say that's kind of where this experience has led me. And
gotcha.
I'm glad we've been able to do this together, because we've all got different things out of it.
Yeah.
But are we ready to move on to the next question?
Yes, let's go into the next question.
Yes,
let's do fire rounds so that we can get through these, because we've been going on for a hot minute.
Did you have any spiritually powerful moments or insight from these visits and conversations with church leaders / congregations / each other? Or is there any sermon that stood out to you that you still remember?
No. Just kidding. No, I'm... Sorry. No, everything's meaningless. This all sucks. I just changed my mind. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, so I'll definitely say that kind of like what you were saying about when we visited the Orthodox church, and it was you were kind of there like in a trance-like state, and it felt like you were kind of transcending time in that moment. I agree with that. You know, like, just, man, there's something about traditional liturgies, and I would say that was even present in the Catholic Church as well. It wasn't the same, but definitely just being in, you know, because with the Catholic Church, it was much more the awe of being in a large building, and there's beautiful artwork everywhere, and, you know, the smells and bells, of course. Like, it was just the architecture, and the mass itself was designed to project awe into the people that are in that service. And so that's how that manifested there. Whereas at the Orthodox Church, it was much more, it was a smaller place. It was much more quaint, but the icons, you know, the chant, the incense, all of these things are there, that really made it just this extremely otherworldly spiritual experience. And so kind of just being present in those services really, really stood out to me. As far as the sermons go, I am terrible at remembering things. Ironically, I remember like bits and pieces from certain pastors' sermons, but I don't really remember any specifically. And this is like going on, you know, 9 months ago, so I don't really remember much, but that's my take.
What about you, David?
Yeah. I wouldn't say spiritual, but especially kind of being forced to be in the moment, because like for myself, I'm usually thinking, okay, you do this and this and this, think ahead. Being kind of put in the moment does, as kind of you say, kind of makes it a timeless experience. And things that, say, more Orthodox churches do with incense, chants, and just being surrounded by a bunch of iconography really sets that in effect. It's like, oh, okay, yeah, this person's talking to me. Oh, okay. And maybe 5 minutes gone by. I don't know.
Yeah. How about you, Michael?
Well, see, as much as I was in awe about the just scale of the Catholic Church, I was also looking at the little details and the power that the relics carried in what they mean and all that. And that was a very moving thing. The little details put in, like we were able to go up to where the relics in the high church were kept, and Father Dwight showed us them, and then looking up, I can't remember exactly what it said, but there were words on the inside of the towering thing. I can't remember, but very Roman architecture.
It may have been the angelic hymn.
Yes, I want to say so.
Possibly, because I know there was a reference to Revelation and the hymns that the angels will sing. So
And
it may
the
have been that
doves.
one. Yeah, the
And,
dove, which symbolizes the Holy Spirit.
Just being in the moment of it all was very powerful. And when they brought the book out, right next to me,
The gospel book, by the way, people.
Yeah. I'm getting incense wafted into me, and I'm hearing and looking at this man reading it, and everyone around just
Facing
honing
him.
in and
Yeah.
focusing. Yeah, it was a very, very powerful thing.
And
also
the organ as well, like made it
Yes.
so epic. Like, this
And
is
how-
the gospel.
and how
It is
everyone
cool.
is step for step, even the younger members of the procession, step by step, following without a hitch. Like, that really was powerful. And then the conversations me and you had sitting on our hotel balcony after the interview
Oh, yeah.
were
Yeah.
all a part of that. And we kind of hit on some deeper notes there that we had talked about, but also progressing through life differently. Some of those kind of hit in a different way after all of our experiences.
Yeah.
And I would say also being back in the Methodist church for the first time since putting my grandfather to rest was very powerful for me personally for a vast amount of reasons. And
Gotcha.
just that moment of being back where you've been before, but it's new again. Kind of.
Seeing it with new
you know?
eyes, kind of.
Yeah. And then obviously just being in like a quasi trance while the whole chanting and incense and the whole procession and liturgy of the Orthodox Church, and how we were still in the vigils, but we felt kind of as this mass all just standing together, just captivated.
Yeah.
Now, that also was very powerful. And so I would put those as some spiritual, powerful moments that we had throughout all of this. And when I took this question down months ago, because I knew I'd want to ask it.
Yeah.
And I remembered parts of Pastor Trent's sermon.
I was about to say,
Mhm.
especially with the kind of number play, the kind of
Yeah.
symbolicness
Because
of
that,
the numbers.
I know that stuck with me for a while because I referenced, like, that's one that I remember. And that, even though I, want to be Presbyterian, that says something about the message put forward and
Yeah.
Pastor Trent. But I don't remember it anymore. a lot has happened since I wrote this question down months ago.
Yeah.
But are we ready to move on to the next question, fellas?
Yeah. You can just, when we're done answering, you can just go ahead and go on.
Okay. This is for you, David.
No, you missed one.
Oh, I did.
Yeah. It's fine.
Would you want to revisit some of the churches we visited, either for personal reasons or to show others maybe a different denomination or have an experience with people you love?
Yeah. So I'm going to kind of break this into two questions. One being would I visit the church, and two being would I want to talk to the pastor again? Because I think for me, at least, those are two separate things. So I have a friend who brought his dad to the Orthodox church that I'm attending last week. And this is going to date this episode, but last week was Lent. And he brought him to a Compline service. And Compline is very hardcore. It is not a good service to bring your loved ones to an Orthodox church as their first service. I recommend bringing them just to liturgy on Sunday or maybe Vespers on Saturday night. But, it's kind of started this phenomena where me and a couple other of our friends are talking about like our family members that aren't Orthodox and their kind of opinions on Orthodoxy. And it's kind of brought in this prospect of us bringing people to the church just to get them to see it. And so that's one of the things I definitely want to do with my parents and they will visit at some point because I've talked to them about this. I want them to see my church, and I want them to, there's actually a small Orthodox mission in Aiken that I would like to take them to as well. Just kind of depending on the circumstance, but I want to get them to see Orthodoxy in general. Now, as far as like other churches that I would visit, it's not that I'm opposed to visiting them. It's the main thing is the logistics of the fact that I don't live in Aiken anymore. And, like if I just so happened to be in Columbia, I would love to visit the Orthodox Church again there, and visit with Father Mark and my professor and talk with them again. I would love to do that. If I were in Greenville, I would absolutely visit Our Lady of the Rosary. Also, I wouldn't mind visiting the Anglican Church, but I'll be honest, like talking with Father Russ was a little bit more impactful to me than actually attending the service, I feel like. So, I think Father Russ is an awesome dude. Same thing with Pastor Trent. I don't think I would really want to go to the Presbyterian service so much as like I wouldn't mind talking with him and hanging out with him again, because some of these people are just like cool people and you want to hang out with them and talk to them again. And others
also very intelligent. Yeah.
And others are like, I would actually like to go to your church because I enjoyed the service. And I wouldn't mind bringing, like, for example, we mentioned Hunter and he had some questions. I wouldn't mind bringing Hunter to a more like a Catholic or an Orthodox service just to see, so that they could see what it's like.
Yeah, because we stepped out of this bubble to experience these things because it's outside of our normal realm.
Yeah.
And what about you, David? Would you like to, for the ones you were able to attend, is there any you would like to visit?
Oh, especially like showing people like, hey, here's a different perspective within, say, Christianity. Definitely Orthodox or the other. Well, the Catholic one, I'll answer that in a later question. Spoilers. But I've actually, like, where I work, I had a few people ask me about different churches, and I actually reference kind of the ones we visited. Like, hey.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've been there.
Yeah.
Especially I can recommend it, or like.
Don't go to this one.
Well, no, I'm like, here's Baptist one, but they're not affiliated with I forget the Baptist.
Southern Baptist Committee.
Yeah,
I think they're like I think they are technically Southern Baptist. They just don't have it in the name for branding purposes.
Yeah, and
I'm pretty certain.
had
I
a
could be
few
wrong about that.
Pentecostal people come, and I'm like, oh, even though it's not my thing, right down the road from where I work, that's their location. Or told a few people about the Lutheran church as well, like, hey, y'all are moving here. If y'all want a different perspective, really good pastor to talk to. And
Pastor John is one I'd like to talk to as well.
Same with
I could talk. Yes,
Trent, because like my job, I have a lot of people moving it in, and a lot of people ask, hey, what are some churches? I'm like, don't know exactly where you fall in line, but here's what I know, and I can recommend these because I've actually talked to a lot of them.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That is really neat. An atheist recommending churches.
I mean, it's my job to kind of know stuff about the area, so it doesn't hurt.
Yeah.
But definitely say, especially the Orthodox, and I would say for people wanting something different, a different experience, Lutheran or Anglican or Presbyterian, I could see myself showing someone like, hey, here's a different perspective.
Yeah, I would definitely say anyone who is kind of living in an insular environment where they've gone to this one church their whole life and that's all they know about Christianity, no matter what tradition or denomination you come from, you should go visit these other ones to see what the contrast is. Yeah.
And I mean, and kind of how we did it, we kind of stepped our toes in and got ankle deep and went all the way to the deep end. So for like showing people, I would probably do the same thing because like, oh, here's something you're familiar with. And we add on to that. We add on to that. No, at the end.
You segue to stuff that you're super unfamiliar with.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was cool. What about you, Michael?
I would love to talk with almost every one of these pastors again, just due to their knowledge and the interesting conversation. And kind of, again, as I'm ever changing in this journey, it's always good to talk to someone who knows more than myself. So, especially talking with Father Mark and Father Dwight, and I know we just said his name, but my brain went. Pastor John. Pastor Trent. I got something stuck in my throat. Those were such great conversations and dialogues we had, and they're all very knowledgeable in their beliefs.
Yeah.
And also because even if I may not be Christian, I do see the merit in trying and exploring something outside of my personal beliefs. And who knows, maybe one day I'll end up there as a convert, or, you never know. But again, we just had so many wonderful conversations and dialogues but I would love to take people who have never experienced a Russian Orthodox service to Father Mark's.
Wear some comfortable shoes.
Yes, and I would love to take people who have never been to a Catholic church to Our Mother of the Rosary, because first, it's absolutely beautiful and awe-inspiring. Second, Father Dwight has so much knowledge.
Yeah.
And I thoroughly enjoyed being there. And really, I would say the same for the Anglican and Lutheran. And of course, I'm going to be biased and want to take someone to the church I grew up in.
Mm-hmm.
First, for a nostalgia sense, because there's a lot of my life in those walls. Second, because I really like Pastor Trent and his enthusiasm and energy, and I appreciate that.
Yeah.
As someone who wasn't always, enthusiastic about my beliefs and kind of told just to kind of hide them,
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I would love to show people who've never experienced it And I would love if all three of us are ever in Greenville again to take David
Yeah.
to our Mother of the Rosary. Because, you know.
You missed that one.
But, yeah.
Yeah.
But this one is relating to that, David. This is for you. Just for you. Was there any point you would have liked to have been present to experience or take part in the action? Like in the interviews, is there points where you wish you were the one behind a mic to kind of lead or segue or have conversation or dialogue you weren't able to have? Is there any parts of the episodes you weren't able to be at or finish for tech reasons you would have loved to be part of the conversation? Or the churches you weren't able to attend with us due to personal life obligations? Anything like that?
Oh, definitely, especially with the visiting and at least being there for the interviews. Wish that kind of life didn't throw weird stuff out of my way. Especially with like visiting the Catholic Church, because like you came back and the experience was fantastic. And you just wouldn't shut up about for like the next few weeks. So I wish I could have been able to go there, or like at the Presbyterian Church, went to the interview, but just had my vaccine, so I was knocked out. Thankfully, I was able to turn the service though.
Yeah. So you, what about like being present to actually record the interviews? Like for people at home who don't know, we were limited by the fact that we only had 3 microphones. So if we had 4, were there moments like during the interviews where you're like, man, I want to say something, but I don't have a mic?
There were. I don't remember exactly what I would have wanted to say or ask or kind of elaborate on. But I just remember those when I was like, oh, dang it.
Yeah.
Or a few of them
should have wrote them down and asked later.
Or just had a whiteboard and be like, hey guys.
Yeah, and be like, there's some strange whiteboard appearing that says these words. I'm not really sure who's holding it up.
I thought about doing that because it's like, oh, I wish I could ask that. So definitely if we had more microphones.
Yeah.
That were proper for doing these interviews and stuff, because for those who don't know, we use dynamic microphones since you can have a bunch of them. Why radio stations and podcasts use them.
Right.
But yeah, so definitely quite a few times where I just wish I could have asked this question or kind of elaborated into a more detailed question off of, say, one of the core questions. Yeah. And then visiting the churches and actually attending the interviews that I ended up missing out on.
Yeah, side question to that. Is there any episodes you think you would have been a better co-host to Bailey than me?
Oh, like the ones where it was just me and you. Oh, like in the interviews, you mean, or just the ones where it was just me and you?
Or just episodes where the internet went out or power went out.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah,
okay.
For those who don't know, after them two moved, my internet decided to act up, and once or twice storms knocked out power or the internet.
And then David was not there for those episodes, or like the second half of the episode.
Yeah, which infuriated me. I mean, the last time that happened, for fun fact, my computer freaked out because it lost internet, froze, and I had to refine what I recorded. And with my connection breaking up, I had to hop on, be like, I found it, hop off, and stuff like that. I was so mad.
Well, I'm glad you were able to answer those, David, because one of my favorite episodes you weren't able to finish, and that was the aliens and ghosts one, where we went for like 3 hours talking nonsense.
Yeah, I was mad about that one. But yeah, and though the fully answer your question, I'm honestly not sure if I would have been the better co-host for some of them, because with Michael being like the kind of chaotic, I guess you could say, energy, and me being more kind of moderate,
passive, and laid back.
Drum.
Yeah, just me being my myself, kind of passive, neutral. It could have led different ways for the better or for the worse. So kind of having your chaotic energy, Michael, works out a lot of the time. So you answer a lot of a lot of the questions with my answers, and I hate it.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
So that's always funny.
On to our final question.
It's the final question. I know it's been a long time, but it's a good question. Here it is.
Been a long
Michael's
time
going to read
coming.
it to all of us. Here it goes.
Here we go, guys. Have you had any major changes to your worldview, either due to this podcast or external factors? And if so, does that affect opinions you have stated in previous episodes?
I feel like I should let you guys answer this one first.
David, do you have an answer off the top of your head?
Not the top of my head. I'm just thinking if anything has changed. Maybe a few things when I got more detailed, but overall, I wouldn't say so. Because it's more kind
boring
of
answers.
Appreciating and respecting one's worldview.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think I've had any major changes in my worldview, more so my spiritual view and the journey from henceforth I'm on. But I would say maybe in earlier episodes, I would have been a little more open-minded or led a discussion in a different route. So I don't have anything off the top of my head here, but I think just the fact of maturing and growing and all the chaos that my life went through from the start of the podcast till I moved and after I moved, like, I think that's changed me just as a person and on a spiritual level, which would influence my statements said. And that's kind of the beauty of doing a show like this, is we've been doing this for so long now that we all are vastly grown since we started.
Mm-hmm. So I think in general, as far as like fundamental changes to my worldview, like obviously I started out Christian and I ended Christian. So in that sense, like I didn't have any foundational worldview shift. That being said, though, when we did start the podcast, I was kind of in a transient state that was journeying towards orthodoxy. And so I think you kind of maybe saw that a little bit in the background of certain episodes. But, you know, as time went on and as, you know, like, for example, when I moved, like I kind of eventually cemented myself as like, okay, this is what I believe and this is where I'm going. So in a sense, like I've had a little bit of a worldview change, and becoming Orthodox is kind of a long process that will not just end at my chrismation, but will continue for the rest of my life. That there's obviously going to be things that change about me, about what I believe, and about what I do. And so I think that in that sense, by virtue of me becoming Orthodox, there may be some things that I articulated in previous episodes that I either wouldn't articulate or would have articulated a little bit differently. So I'm thinking, for example, in the episode on the resurrection of Jesus, one of those episodes, I was dumb and I don't like didn't at the time for some reason didn't remember like the theological distinctives of the resurrection, and I didn't recall that Jesus ascended to heaven after his resurrection. And I was like, I don't really know what happens after. And like, obviously I look back, I'm like, that's stupid. You know, so I've said a lot of things on the podcast. You know, it's only a matter of time, you know, like we've recorded over 60 episodes, probably close to 100 hours or something like that. I don't know the exact number, but there's bound to be things that I've said that are stupid and that I regret. And so there is some of that, but for the most part, you know, I think the way this show arced, I appreciate the way that we've kind of covered things from topic to topic. And I think, I mean, obviously, if we were to, and I think I might have mentioned this earlier, but if we were to do the show now, if we had started just now, it would look much different. in terms of the structure and process. But at the same time, that's part of the beauty of the fact that we recorded it when we did, because it's a snapshot in time and it's indicative of the phronema that I was in at that time.
Yeah. And kind of the journey we'll all be stoked upon together, whether we knew it or not.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think looking back and seeing things you would do different is just part of growth as a person.
Yeah.
And I mean, it shows that we have grown both in an earthly sense and in a spiritual sense, that like I would come in with more open eyes, say if we started the show now, but I wouldn't be where I'm at if it wasn't because of when we started the show. Who knows? We all three might still be in Aiken. I might still be working my dead-end job, hating every second of it. Who knows? Maybe I'd be even more agnostic than I started. But that's kind of the beauty of this process and this transition stage in our life, going from college age to having to conform ourselves to an ever-changing world and become more acclimated in the professional sense. And moving out of our hometowns and becoming men.
Now that we're men, we can do anything. Now that
DMCA.
we're men. Now that we're men. Sorry.
We get DMCA stricken right there.
But,
I sang it too good.
Yeah, so I think we all have things, and we're not going to pinpoint because we'd have to watch every fucking episode, but there's going to be things that we look at and go, that was stupid.
Oh, there was one other thing I said that now that you mentioned that in the morality episode, again, of course, I've got to pinpoint like the early episodes, but I was like, we eventually came to the point where like we all agreed that morality has to be objective, but I couldn't get David to believe that God was the source of that objective morality. So I was like, he basically conceded that objective morality is objective, but didn't concede that God was the source of it. So I was like, well, what is the source then? And he was like, well, I don't know. Maybe we'll find out one day. And I was like, so if we find out that if it's slime and like a space rock somewhere, then you'll believe that. And he's like, yeah. And that was stupid. That was a stupid hypothetical.
That is the beginning of David's agnostic atheism.
There you go.
But yeah, anybody got any questions off top of the dome? Anything before we wrap this pony up and ship it off?
No, this has been good. I think it's good that we've had this Q&A because there's been a lot of like variety of types of questions, and it's definitely brought up some good reflection in this one.
Again, I appreciate everyone that sent questions in.
Thank you to everyone who sent in questions. Definitely.
The love, humility, and caring that has been shown to us throughout this journey that is this podcast.
Yeah.
And thank you for taking time out of your day to email 3 random dudes.
Yeah.
Questions. We appreciate it.
Yeah. So that all being said, this is our next to last episode. Next week is going to be our final episode. And that being said, we're going to be kind of talking about it's kind of going to be like a reflections on the whole podcast, sort of like this one was, but a little bit more in-depth and focused. We're going to kind of look back on all the episodes as a whole, the podcast in general, and kind of reflect on how things have changed in our lives and what we've learned and where we're going. And so that's going to be the next episode. But until then, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Facing the Gates. And if you have any comments, questions, or concerns, you can send them to facingthegatespod@gmail.com. Though the show is ending, our email will still exist. So if you want to send us questions later, retroactively, sure, go ahead. It's fine. We'll maybe
knows?
Answer them.
Maybe if 100
I'll get them, so I'll have to figure out what to do with them.
We'll have to start ananother Q&A and post it like a year later. Who knows?
Yeah, maybe we'll like go viral and then have to do another episode.
Oh, God. I mean, it is what it is, people. But
right.
I would say it's been real.
Yeah, I'd say it's been fun.
I'd say it's been real fun, and we'll see you guys next week on Facing the Gates.
See you on the next episode, which is the last one. See you then.